Good morning, good day or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Martin Sene. I work at NPL in the UK, and I'm also a member of CIPM and a member of the CIPM Digital SI Task Group. Welcome to the final session of what's been a fascinating, a stimulating and a challenging workshop. I think this week's really shown how it's still possible to harness international expertise and catalyze international collaboration despite the challenges posed by the global pandemic. On Monday, at the start of the meeting, Joachim Ulrich, who chairs the CIPM Digital SI Task Group, clearly set out the challenge and the opportunity that the digital revolution presents for the metrology community and indeed the wider quality infrastructure. He also set out a grand vision for an SI digital framework, a sustainable framework for the SI in a digital world, so that the incredible value the global measurement system has delivered in the analog world can continue in the digital world. And the presentations and the discussions of the last 5 days have reinforced the importance of this challenge. They've given us a glimpse of the enormous amount of relevant work and resources available in many organizations, and they've highlighted the scale of the task. We do need a lot that we need to do to realize the enormous potential for metrology to contribute to the digital world. So against that background, in this last session, we returned to Professor Ulrich's words. His statements were we were at the beginning of an exciting journey, and he gave an invitation to travel together. And so following on from the previous session, we're going to turn from what we've learned from each other to what are the most important next steps. And to facilitate this, we have a distinguished panel representing different parts of the international quality system. Eti Feller, President of ILAC and the CEO of the Israel Laboratory Accreditation Authority, Roman Schwartz, President of CIML, Luca Murray, Chair of IEC TC1 and IEC TC25, Leslie Pendrell, Chair of ISO TC12, Thomas Liu, Chair of the CIPM Working Group on Data, and a Senior Fellow and Director of Research Infrastructure at A-Star Singapore. Weinand Lau, the CIPM President and Director of Regional International Liaison Innovation in NMISA. Joachim Ulrich, who I've already spoken about, CIPM Vice President, Chair of CIPM TG on the Digital SI and President of PTB. And last but not least, BIPM's Director, Martin Milton. And the steering committee for the workshop have selected 3 questions to draw out their views on the next steps, on joint aims for the community, which I will ask them to respond to in a moment. But as for the rest of the workshop, I'll invite you all to add your own comments or suggestions using the chat function. And Andy Henson, who is the moderator of this session, will post questions from the chat. We'll only have a limited time at the end of the session for Andy to lead on some of those questions, but be assured the rest of the questions and the comments will be retained and reviewed after the meeting. So let me turn to the first question from the steering group, which is primarily for our colleagues in other parts of the quality infrastructure. There's a value proposition for the digital SI, and is it clear? We're familiar with the value that the SI has brought to business and citizens in the analog world. Is it clear that we need to make the system fit for the digital world, and that in doing so we'll bring enormous real value? So perhaps I could start by asking Roman that question. Yeah, so Roman. I can't hear you, Roman.
Now you can probably hear me.
Yes. So about the value, about the value proposition for the SI, is it clear at the end of this week?
Okay, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer this first question. And for OML, I can definitely answer with yes. So let me support this with 2 arguments. I have listened to and I was very impressed by the many excellent presentations we have heard. during this workshop, where the speakers covered the wide spectrum of various stakeholders involved in measurements. And from all presentations, but also from the many questions during the Q&A sessions, I clearly perceived that there is a need and a broad support for creating a globally uniform and globally accepted language and a sustainable framework for the use and exchange of digital measurement data based on the FAIR principles and the SI. And secondly, if I may add, from the perspective of legal metrology, I can also say yes, because the SI digital framework is open for all relevant stakeholders, thus supports a holistic approach and close cooperation of the various stakeholders in the field of industrial, legal, and scientific metrology, including related quality infrastructure activities such as standardization and accreditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. Perhaps Etty Feller, from the perspective of ILAC, you'd like to answer the question.
Hello, everyone. It's a great privilege to take part in this final session and the roundtable. From ILAC point of view, I think that we are already there, and the market began to do its work. And in order to make sure that not everyone will invent the wheel, it's better that it will be centralized and the work will be done in cooperation with all the relevant stakeholders, as just was said. I want to express my thanks to all the participants that gave their presentation with the real examples of what is going on there. So in my opinion, there is a lot of information that we can gather together in order to make sure that, yes, there is a value and there is a need to proceed with this job. Thank you.
Thank you. Luca, perhaps from the value of viewpoint of IEC.
Yes, also from my side, thank you very much for this invitation. It's I'm very honored to be here. And I would like also to provide some perspective about this. I definitely agree that this workshop has significantly contributed to highlight how wide is the scope of the SI digital framework and how ambitious and diverse are its goals. I would say that the technical and organizational challenges are on the table. Maybe some more will appear in the next future, but let me say something a bit about what the broader picture could be, about which we've heard something in the last days. I would like to mention a beautiful sentence from the Guide to the Expression of Uncertainty in Measurement, the GUM, on this matter. The GUM says that the guide itself provides a framework for assessing uncertainty, but it cannot substitute for critical thinking, intellectual honesty, and professional skills. Working towards the SI digital framework might lead to discover that something analogous could be said for the digital transformation in metrology. No framework can substitute for critical thinking, intellectual honesty, and professional skills. And therefore, in this perspective, we might discover that on top of the technical and the organizational layers, we might acknowledge that there must be a third layer, the one of ethical principles. The one that even in automatic calibrations and measurements does not remove human beings from the equation, which is not so obvious, as you know, from the artificial intelligence field. In a sentence, the more ambitious this framework is, and let's hope so, the more this third layer of ethics could be also important. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. And last but not least, Leslie, from the viewpoint of ISO, about
Thank
our
you.
value proposition.
Thank you, Martin. When we're thinking about value proposition, that's to say the impact, I can see two distinct cases. One is immediate benefits and other benefits which are a bit more long-term. It's been a wonderful week. It's been a real pleasure to be here listening to all the presentations and sessions. And the key words at the beginning of the week were, for me, quality infrastructure. Now, if we're looking for immediate payback from this initiative, then I think we see that already happening in the measurement quality infrastructure, where the NMIs are interacting with the people responsible for the ontologies and the big data guys. Those people are clearly getting together and creating new things, XML, forms of the SI and so forth. So there I think we see immediately some benefits occurring. And this has to do with some similarities. Measurement metrology itself is in fact part of information technology, the wider field of information science, where we're communicating measurement information. A measurement science system is a kind of communication system, and units of measurement are like words. So it's natural that we're getting a payback from that community, that connection between the communities. The more long-term benefits, I think, are going to be apparent and probably are going to be more significant in the second kind of quality infrastructure that we were talking about. And that's to say, metrology is not an end in itself, but it's providing quality assured measurement for everything else that everyone's interested in. So the general quality infrastructure for products and processes of all kinds. And if we're looking for payback there, value added, then we're thinking about solving the grand challenges, for example, the climate issue, health, and so forth. There, those paybacks are going to take a while to become visible. And my responses to the next question will give you some examples of what I see as the main challenges in that second scenario. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thanks. Maybe we'll move on to that second question. There's been a real endorsement here of, and you particularly, Leslie, have spoken about the enormous potential for value to come from bringing the SI into and of having a framework for it in the digital world. But to do that, we're going to need to engage with and collaborate with and coordinate, and others have spoken about this, with the other parts of the quality infrastructure from industry and from science. So how's the best way to get that coordination and get those activities coordinated in the best way to engage? What's the important things that we need to do for that coordination? And that's really for any of the panel. Perhaps some of those people who haven't had a chance to speak might like to say something now.
Otherwise, Martin, I could carry on.
Yes, carry on.
As I was already going on. So if we go to the quality infrastructure in general terms, then I've identified three main parts. Firstly, policy. Okay, so the politicians deciding that health and climate change and so forth are the things that have to be fixed. And if you excuse me, I gave you a case study during the week where we in ISO TC12 got together with the health informatics community, the standards bodies, and third-party stakeholders to work out the issues of quantities and units in e-health. So there's a good example, I think, that we can use even in other cases. Mm-hmm. The second part of quality infrastructure is the regulators who are setting the rules and making the decisions for conformity assessment. So a number of questions came up in my mind during this week, which I can't find the answers for yet. How do we make decisions with machines? Is there an XML for that kind of thing? No idea. And how do we take proper account of decision risks caused by uncertainty? We're working on ordinal and nominal scale. So those are issues that have to be dealt with. And the third, just to be very brief, is standardization, my own home plane here. There, it's essential, and it's been said earlier this afternoon as well, that it's really important to use a consistent language across the communities. It's okay to have several different ontologies, that doesn't matter. But if in different ontologies are using the same term but in different meanings, then we have a problem. And that's some of the issues that we in the standards bodies are working very intensively at the present with, getting the standard terminology in place. So thank you.
Any other comments on how we might use the best used resources from other parts of QI, industry, science?
If I may add.
So Etty, do go ahead, and then Milton has a comment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that I agree, but I would like to add that by the end of the day, we have to take into consideration those that will use this information. I agree that we have to work with the policymaker, with the regulators, and make sure that they are willing and able to do and to work with us about the new way of showing our results. In general, I would like also to say that we have to work together with the industry and with the CABs, that by the end of the day, they will have to follow all these policies and fulfill the regulators' requirement. Otherwise, if we won't combine all of them together, we can have the best project, but no one will be able or willing to use it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Martin, Milton, and then I'll come back to Luca.
Thank you. Yes, we've had a lot of discussion about what is planned in NMIs and what could be achieved in the QI infrastructure. I think it's also been interesting where we've had input from really the user end. And APMP, for instance, did a survey which Dr. Takashi Asuda fed back to us. And one of the points he made was that a small, concrete and feasible model is needed of what is the new business expected from a digital SI, from this new digitization of QI. And he emphasized that we need to be clearer as to what it is we're carving out for the future digital transformation. What is the benefit to business? So I think it's useful to look at it from that end. And in that context, we had a discussion in the previous session about the use cases and discuss which were the most pressing use cases. And I think all of the panelists came back and said that the most pressing use case was probably a digital calibration certificate. So the answer to your question here, Martin, is the coordination needed, and the basis for that coordination really ought to be the collaboration that gets us quickest towards that most important use case, that most pressing use case.
Thanks very much. Just to Luca had a comment, and then I think we may be going to the third question here. Just keeping an eye on the time. Luca.
Yes, thank you very much. Only for mentioning that in metrology, we already have a successful experience of international worldwide collaboration, which is JCGM, the Joint Committee for Guides in Metrology. And maybe this is the right time for creating a third working group, together with the one about a vocabulary and one about everything about uncertainty, measurement uncertainty. Maybe now it's the right time for creating a working group about digital transformation in metrology. I remember that JCGM is aimed at creating guidance documents which can be implemented by the member organizations. Maybe it's the right time for creating a guidance document about digital transformation in metrology. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last question. Yes, do.
Maybe I can add also to the second question.
Yes, do. Roman.
Yes. So I followed the discussion and the contributions, and I thought it's worthwhile mentioning that looking at this huge dimension of our task, we need a very good cooperation and bundling of all forces, of all stakeholders. And I would like to mention that we are already considering a joint statement of intent as a basis for the future cooperation. And kind of nucleus has already been established. As I mentioned in my presentation, we have started with a cooperation in a joint task group of BIPM and the OML to look at the joint statement of intent towards the digital transformation. And I think we need this as a basis and maybe as a starting point for a future working program.
Thank you. I am looking at the time, so I just want to go to the last question, which will give certainly, and I'm going to come to Tom and Joachim for this question particularly, because this is we've recognised there's enormous value in this initiative we've set out on, and we've seen it's got an enormous scale. So I think to finish back with our own metrology community, given what we've learnt and the scale of the challenge, what do you think are the most important next steps here to deploy this digital framework? And I'll start with Tom and Joachim.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Some of you may already know that the CIPM is preparing a strategy to address some of the evolving needs in the metrology for the next decade, particularly to foster international cooperation, promote interdisciplinary communication, and also to establish some interdisciplinary ad hoc task group within and without the metrology community. And all these are done in response to some of the grand challenges and such as climate change, health, food, safety and energy, and also the digital revolution or Industry 4.0 revolution that we already heard of in this recent presentation. Of course, digital transformation has been identified as one of the horizontal area that cut across multiple disciplines in the CIPM strategy. So this is a work in progress, and the CIPM is developing this strategy in consultation with the CC president, and then this will then be, presented to the NMI directors for the feedback and input, and then hopefully we can then finalize a strategy that will include broader than the digital transformation, but certainly it will have some part of it that addresses the digital SI framework. And we are planning that this strategy will then be tabled at the next CGPM in 2022, where the government representative of the Meter Convention would be there to help us endorse that particular strategic plan, and that would make us go global in terms of how we would deploy and execute the digital SI framework.
Okay,
that's my view from what we are doing now. Of course, it's work in progress.
Yes, thanks, Tom. Joachim, what next steps?
Yes, thank you very much. I would just emphasize what Thomas said. We are working on this strategy. We have a clear roadmap towards the General Conference in 2022. And we hope that we can finalize a resolution until then. And this also then finally, and this is very, very important, would lead to more resources in the BIPM and also encourage more and more the NMIs to put in resources and work towards this grand vision. So this is, I think, a very important issue, such that we can really sustain, have a sustainable effort in the direction of the SI digital framework. And then, as was said before by Martin Milton, I think we have to identify the most important or the most important use cases. And we are very eager to hear from you what the use cases will be. For sure, what I heard now in the workshop, the DCC will be one of them. And there is already a lot of pressure from industry, from various sides, that we go ahead. We would need it in Industry 4.0 and so on. And so I think we should really work together to bring that onto the road. And finally, for sure, we have to bring, and this would be a follow-up of this workshop as well. So you are very much invited to take part in webinars, to suggest webinars, to just suggest meeting and platforms. So this was just the first platform, so to say. But what we need to do now is to collaborate on an everyday basis and down to, and this is very, very important, down to the experts. This is what we have seen now in our own endeavor. We had this expert group and they did a beautiful job at the end of the day. And they had over a year now, weekly meetings to prepare all of that, what we have now. So just to give you an impression what the effort would be to continue. And I think and I hope that this workshop is a kind of initiative that we come closer together, that we work together on a daily basis, on an expert basis, and most importantly, to define one or two very kind of simple and very impactful use cases.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't know whether Vinand or Martin wants to have one last word or two before we see if they're open for a couple of questions from the floor. Well,
I think, Martin, if you want to, I think my colleagues summarized it very well. Let me just make one statement, perhaps, and that is that if you are from a developing country, don't be disheartened at all if you are not participating in the digitalization effort yet. There are huge benefits to be had from digitalization in the developed world and from the uptake of the technologies that are now being developed at the top level. And I think will make sure from our side as well that we make sure that we take the needs of the developing countries also with us when we develop this further.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'll maybe turn over to Andy to see if there's just a few questions. We're short on time, but I understand that we can run over by just a few moments. So before we go to the closing statements, so Andy.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Yes, we've got 1 or 2 questions coming in here. And this one is aimed at those on the panel who are not native English speakers. And it's about the possibility of having the descriptive elements, the metadata, the headers, the data sets, etc., in their own language. So is this desirable and how practical is it? So let's have somebody that's a non-English speaker here. So perhaps Thomas could start on that one.
Okay. Well, my take is that what is the lingua franca in the digital technology, right? And if you have a computer or digital processing unit that processes at your level, then perhaps there's a mechanism or a way you can translate what is already established into what you are doing. So I think it's not quite like what we see in the usual day-to-day conversation where we speak in different languages, right? But I think the digital language is fairly uniform, and at least for now they are based on Neumann architecture, and it's a binary bit 1 and 0, and I think it's pretty much around there. Of course, unless you have other architecture that's different from this. That's my take.
Roman, would you like to say a word or two?
Yes, thank you. Just to add, if it comes to legal methodology and the legal requirements, then I'm sure we have to consider the national languages. This is a legal requirement, for example, in Germany, and I know from many other countries that at least standards are provided in and regulations are provided in the national language.
Okay, let's move on from that point and look at one of the other questions. Does the panel think that potential users of the digital SI understand the importance of uncertainty, metrological traceability, and competence, accreditation, and so on? So, Etty, let's start. I think you probably have the highest possibility of being able to say yes to this. Could you unmute, please?
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, I think that you answered, Andy. The answer is yes. But I want to echo what was said earlier. We have to bear in mind that we have developed and developing countries among ourselves. So we have to be very careful and to go step by step. But in general, the answer is yes.
Perhaps I could just add to that myself as well, because I sit from time to time down in the World Trade Organization. And coming from the metrology side, it's sometimes a little bit frustrating because the need for international standards, recognized international documentary standards and accreditation comes up quite often. But of course, metrology sits hidden behind that and it is less visible. People actually inherit the benefits by adopting standards like 17025 and so on.
Thank you. I think there's probably lots we could say, and certainly, as I said earlier, all the questions that have been logged are going to be looked at afterwards.
Martin, could I just finish with one comment? It's not a question, but I would like to show it.
Yes.
It comes from Daniel Herzenreuter. Earlier there was talk about creating some sort of group, and he's pointing out that such a working group should involve the QI and important scientific unions. So something along the lines of our joint committees that we have working on other matters.
Yes, that a very good input there. So thank you very much to all of the panel members. And all that it remains for me to do now is to hand over first to Roman Schwartz, President of CIML, and then to Weinand Lau, President of CIPM, who will close the workshop. So thank you.
Thank you. My presentation has been pre-recorded. At the end of this session, and indeed at the end of this workshop, I'm pleased and honored to begin with some closing remarks and statements on behalf of the BIPM OML Joint Task Group, before the President of the CIPM, Dr. Weinand Lau, will do the final closing of this workshop. Let me begin by thanking the organizing team and all speakers for their excellent work and presentations, respectively, which contributed significantly to the success of this interesting and exciting online workshop. In summary, I can say that the Joint Task Group recognizes the importance of the international system of units, the SI, which underpins all measurements in industry, trade, legal metrology, and science. It recognizes the necessity for a digital transformation of industrial, legal, and scientific metrology activities and processes in close cooperation with all stakeholders in the field of quality infrastructure. It supports that digital representations of physical devices should rely on robust, unambiguous, and machine-actionable data, which are based on the SI and on FAIR principles, to facilitate efficient processes in industry, economy, society, modern research, and development globally. The Joint Task Group supports a respective joint statement of intent to be elaborated and signed by all stakeholders in the field of quality infrastructure, and invites representatives of other organizations to join this initiative towards the digital quality infrastructure framework based on the SI and FAIR principles. With this, I would also like to thank you, the participants, for your interest and active participation in this online workshop. My best wishes, stay safe and healthy, and goodbye. With this, I hand over to the CIPM President.
Thank you. And thank you, Roman. And let me first thank Roman for his closing remarks and reiterate that we are looking forward to work even closer with the CIML and the BIML on digitalization. It is a global issue for metrology that both scientific and legal metrology need to address together as a basis to take it further and implement inequality infrastructure with the other QI international organizations that are also represented here today. So I want to express our sincere appreciation to the CIPM task group and the expert group for the time that they are devoting to this course, and in particular, their chair, whose enthusiasm for the course is really driving this process, and that is Professor Joachim Ulrich, and also the other members of CIPM on the task group. The CIPM is really looking forward to your final recommendations on how we can further this issue globally. Then I want to thank the members of the steering committee that were the main organizers of the event. Their names are on your program, so I'm not going to repeat all of them. But in particular, Daniel Hudson-Reuter from PTB and Andy Henson from the BIPM, and also then Johnny Flamand and Celine Fallac that did a lot of work in the background and assisted Len. And I'm sure that Daniel had assistance from his colleagues at PTB. So Daniel, please thank them on our behalf. Also, thank you to the Lenny operators for your assistance. I'm quite sure that all of you that I mentioned now deserve a weekend. Finally, thank you to the speakers, including our colleagues from the other QIIOs, and especially the ones in the panel here today. Etty, Leslie, Luca, and Roman, thank you for your time that you have devoted, and we listened carefully to your valued inputs and how you summarized everything today. And we will definitely work even closer in the future. But especially thank you to all the speakers, the presentations. Without you, of course, we would not have a workshop. So I think as a last word, I'm going to say this is the beginning. We hope of a long and fruitful collaboration. We are already collaborating, but now we're going to collaborate even more. And then thank you to everyone that joined the online workshop. We at a certain point had over 600 people live with us in the workshop. And so we really appreciate your time that you have given us this week. And we hope, like us, you now know more about digitalization and the plans that we can do together. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend and goodbye.